All of you. It's a very correct time to sleep and enjoy the short snaps that we normally take at this time of the day. But you have to stop that nap and listen to me for the next 15-20 minutes. And that makes my job tougher to keep you awake for this 15-20 minutes. Also, the biodatas and CVs that are read and are 10-15 years old. And they don't give you much solace in trying to speak to an audience like this. And try to speak relevant, because that is all work done 10 years, 15 years back. I came here at 2:30 and was listening to the last part of the previous session and Dr. Venkatrao's talk. And I got the sense that the seminar today is on the education policy and the context of globalization and the impact on the higher education systems. I was given the topic, just the topic that was given to me to speak was higher education 2040 or beyond, 2040 and beyond, and not given the context of the education policy and things like that. So I'm not going to speak much on the education policy as such. What I'm trying to leave you with is some questions. Don't expect answers from me. I think I'm going to leave questions and probably try to talk some directions in which we should be looking for answers. We should be looking for answers. If I have to look at the mirror and try to predict 2040 or 2050, 2040 and 2050, that is the most difficult thing to do. Most difficult thing to do. As I was talking during the coffee time, if somebody were to ask 1,000 years back or 500 years back or 100 years back this question, let us say in 1919, this question was asked of what the system would be in 1969, 50 years from then. It was much easier to do then. It was, if you take the context of China, or if you take the context of India of 1919 and try to predict 1969 what is likely to happen, you could do a little bit more accurate prediction of what is happen or what can happen. If I see the humankind as a whole, the eternal questions of humankind, of the human species, from 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years, if you were to ask, the questions that were asked by the humankind and which were tried to be solved or which were tried to be answered for, were the questions of hunger, question of disease, and question of war, and war, winning of wars. These were the questions that were asked by the humankind for the last centuries, thousands of years. And if you see the agricultural age, the industrial age, or the pre-agricultural age, you will find that people have tried to find answers to these questions for the humankind. But if I see the context of 2019 or for the period that we are today, the questions of hunger, the questions of disease, and the questions of war have almost gone. I don't think we ask these questions at this point of time that we need to conquer these questions. And therefore, humankind has to find new questions which will become relevant for it to be pursued along for the next hundreds of years, 22nd century or wherever beyond. And whatever pursuit that we make towards solving those questions will be affecting the next 20 years or 30 years also, and therefore that context. And what are these questions that the human beings want to answer now? What are these questions? Anybody can guess what will be these questions be? What will be these questions that the human being is trying to answer at this point of time? By different small activities, technology changes, biology changes, system changes, the humanism changes, the liberal part of state changes. What are the experiments that happen all over the world? The questions that the human beings are trying to answer at this point of time are the questions of immortality. The humankind wants to become immortal now. And the experiments that are happening in trying to increase the age, are bearing fruits at this point of time. We ourselves see it in the last 50, 60 years that the average life expectancy has increased. So the world is working towards a question of how to become immortal. The second question it asks about is the question of happiness. How do I become happy? Definition of happiness can differ. What the happiness definition is all about can differ. But it is trying to answer that question of happiness. And the third question that it is trying to ask now in all its endeavors is the divinity, the godlike powers, that I desire the godlike powers. And these are the three broad questions that come to mind which the human being is trying to answer technologically, socially, or other means that we have, or any other means that we have. And why I mentioned these questions is that if I talk about 2040 or 2040, the work that will happen in these directions will be telling us the society that we expect in 2030 or 2040 or 2050, will be telling us some directions of that society. Before I go into that speculation of that society, before I go into that, because that will then bring us the context back to the education, of what I will be in that time, and then I have to ask the question, what is the education context at that point of time? Let us spend a few minutes on today. And where we are, what we are doing today. If I see the world today, or what is called the machine today, is guided by three major principles, activities. Technology activities, that is what is guiding technology. The second thing that is guiding is the business, or the globalization as we call it, the business. And the third thing is ecology. These are the three major drivers of the machine as what we call as world today. Now, if I take the context of technology, what is technology today? Right from the vintage year of 2007, when there was a big quantum jump in the conglomeration of the different technologies that came in 2007, if somebody were to write down of what happened in 2007 in the technology field, it will be very interesting 2-3 pages that will come. Very interesting 2-3 pages. And the combination of all these things and what is happening from 2007 to 2019 and the trends at this point of time. So in technology, if you were to see, one common line that we can think and very rightly say is everything is accelerating, not only increasing, but accelerating. And if I were to draw an acceleration curve, the exponential type of curve, which is a curve which starts like this and then goes like this after a certain point of time, we have crossed this steady state or the slow pace of change, and we are in this part of the accelerating curve at this point of time, which is evident if I just take one example of the Moore's law in electronics, and which is controlling the technology field of the electronics, the sensors, the memories, the computational power, and everything connected with the IC chips. And Moore's law, which is the law which states that every 18 months the number of transistors on the chip will double, and every 18 months the cost of that will become half of that. That is the Moore's law, which has stood us for the last 60 years now, 60, 70 years now. Remember the story of the person who invented chess, and 64 squares in the chess board, and the king to whom he gave the game was very happy and asked him, "What do you want? Because I'm so happy that you have invented this game of chess." And the answer of that man was that I'm a very poor person, I don't have enough to eat, so I just need some rice from you. And the king said, "That's all? How much rice do you want?" And the answer he gave was, "On this chessboard of 64 squares, please put 1 grain of rice on the first square and keep on doubling it. As you pass from 1 square to the 64th square, keep on doubling. That's all is the rice that I need." And the king had not enough with him to give the rice which was at the 64th square. He couldn't give that. I'm putting the point of doubling, and that is the pace at which the Moore's law is happening. The doubling of the computing capability, the doubling of the memory capability, the doubling of the sensor technology. Along with that, the almost more than doubling of the networking capability, or the everything that gets connected onto this technology, everything is accelerating. And we have reached the Moore's law almost up to now 30th square, the doubling. So the initial doubling was very small, as the curve was here. Now the curve has gone to this side. So another 18 months, the doubling will be huge. The accelerating change will be very, very huge. And you will see the effect of that doubling on almost everything in life, I'm telling in life, not on technology. Everything that we do in life. And that will be the technology change that is on us in the area of this computational power, or the internet, or the sensors, or anything, the IoT that we call, or whatever field that we call, the robotics that we may call, or anything that can happen on this. And that's where the power of this acceleration is unsettling us. It is not very easy to get settled with an accelerating change. It is the rate of change is changing with the change. And that's most difficult thing to get a stability position on. And if I take the other technology area, which is very critical at this point of time, is the biology area. And that also, the pace of acceleration is again in the same way as the pace of acceleration in the electronic industry. If you take the cost of the analysis of the gene has come down from $1 million to some few $100s today in this same period. Change in an accelerated way. And therefore, with that change, the change that happens in the biology, in the maneuvering of the genes, in the maneuvering of the diseases, or in the maneuvering of improving the quality of individuals, is changing at an accelerating pace. And if this change that is happening in this biology area, you will see that the change that happens in the next 20 years of this acceleration will be very, very huge, You can take other technology areas also. You can take the other technologies, or you will find the same technology acceleration. So the word that I'm trying to express is that the three things which drive the world: technology, ecology, and the business. The technology, I have told you, and I have tried to tell you that it is accelerating, whatever way that you can take it. Now, if you take the business world, and that is the globalization, is one of the things which is again was in an increasing trend, the globalization of business, globalization of communication, and globalization of movement of people and things. People and things was accelerating, and which we have seen the change that has happened by that change of globalization that has happened in the world. But now we see a little bit negative trend in this globalization by the political system change that is being talked about all over the world, and we see a little bit negative change. But in spite of that, the globalization of what I call as flows in the world, the flows in the world is increasing. And what is this globalization of flows? The globalization of the flows of Facebook, the globalization of the flows of Amazon, the globalization of the flows of any other social network, Google, or any of these medias that is we are seeing, the globalization of flows is at a ever increasing acceleration in the present time. And this globalization of flows which bring people together on a common platform is now increasing quite a bit, is now on the increasing trend. And that is the globalization context now, that it is the human being is not now an individual human being, has become a individual, one part of the individual of the flow. And I think the individual has to think of what contribution it is going to make to the flow rather than only consume from the flow, And this globalization context in terms of flows has increased tremendously over the last, and you see that change today also. The social media change, the flow of information, the flow of marketing change. Any area that you take, you will see an accelerating curve. So again, the word acceleration comes there. The third point, that is the third point which is driving the world today, is the point of ecology. And if you see that, there was a book that I was reading some time back in which there are some 30 different parameters considered for both the change in the ecological parameters and the sociological parameters. And if you were to plot this for the last 60, 70, 80 years now, all these curves were of this acceleration type curves. Whether it is the carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, the acidity of the sea, whether it is the fish culture, aquaculture, whether it is the temperature rise, whether it is the sociological changes, you plot all these curves over the last 50, 60 years, and every curve is an accelerating decrease or an accelerating increase. So the world, if I can expand this for an hour, this itself can become a lecture, but I don't want to do that. But the point that I want to drive home is, today, we are at a situation of technology, business, and everything ecological and sociological in an accelerating rate of change. Human being likes a linear change. It doesn't like accelerating change, always. It always likes only linear change. Comfortable with a linear change. If something changes in a slow period of time, easy for me to do. So if you were to plot a curve of the change of these three parameters on the curve, and we have come to the point where the curve is trying to go straight up, and on the same curve, you plot the curve of the adaptation by the human being to these changes. And I'll get a very slowly increasing curve. That is, the adaptation speed is becoming little bit increase only, not a tremendous increase. If I say that the human being got used to a sewing machine in about 60, 70 years, or to a TV in 30 years, or to a computer in 10 years, now to a smartphone in a few years, that pace of adaptation change is a very small increase, very small increase. And the curve today has crossed, that is this curve and this curve, the technology curve has crossed this curve. and our adaptation to these changes of technology has come to a stage where there is a huge gap, now. I think we should keep this in the context in which I'm going to talk a few more points for the next 10 minutes, in the context that we should keep. And if I see that the same things and the same pace of change will continue for the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, 2050, what do I foresee is the question. What do I foresee? And maybe the context of the education also will come in that sense. What do I foresee in that? I foresee in that in the future, there are, as I told you, the human being, the species, the human species, the three questions that they've tried to solve in the previous thousands of years and the three questions that they're trying to solve for the next 1,000 years, there will be three things that what we will foresee in the future. One is that the humans will lose their economic and military usefulness, I'm making a very big statement. And what I mean to say that if I see the utility of the human being, I will see the utility of the human being in doing some things. At his place of work, at his place of whatever that he was trying to do, and the man was, individual human was considered as a useful individual, Whether he was fighting a war, and he was going to a war field and then fighting the war, he was considered as a human being who is useful to whichever powers were ruling him, He was useful. The second thing that will happen is that the systems will continue to find value in humans collectively but not individually. I think this is again a statement which you should digest, which you should digest much more, collectively but not individually. And the third thing is, the system will find value in some useful individuals, that is, a extraordinary elite situation of people, superhumans as we may call them, rather than the normal population. I may call these statements as, why should I bother? This will be 100 years from now or 200 years from now, and why should I bother? No. The accelerating change and the things that you see, small things happening all around, everywhere, all around the world in biology and technology, is driving us fast towards this situation. The issue of the artificial intelligence taking over the human being, which was predicted to be 2034, has now been preponed to 2029. And beyond that, we see the age of intelligence and super artificial intelligence. Beyond that, just 9 years from now is not very far off. Very far off. So the humanism and the liberalism which was ruling the world, which has been ruling the world as the basic tenet of running these things, can probably get absorbed by this type of changes that are happening. It's a very big question to ask, actually. In fact, if I just take the example of the battlefield, we are talking about battlefields in which the wars were fought for a few hours, whether it was the Haldighati Yuddh fought for only a few hours, or we are talking about the world wars which went on for years in fields, or in between some other wars which went on for a days or a month or things like that. But today, if I were to see in next 5-7 years, what will be the type of war? The war may be of a few minutes. Only of a few minutes. And that is the change that apparent on us, very much apparent on us. In that few minutes, the nuclear stations of a country are destroyed, the economy of the country is destroyed, and trillions of rupees will be vanished in a minute. Nobody knows the trace of what and where this has happened. The communication system of a country can be destroyed, and everything without even the man knowing what has happened. It has happened. It can be destroyed. You saw the Supreme Court judgment a few days back, in which it said that the Facebook is a much bigger evil than a nuclear war. There is a tendency, that is the trend, that if you can see, the trend that we are trying to move in. And that is the war of the future. And where is human being in this? Nothing. The human being of trying to go and trying to kill a person by a cut on the body is now not there. It is the cut on the technology network. That is the war of the future. That is the war of the future. You take the field of any other field now. You take the field of medical sciences. You are talking about if somebody were to predict a contagious disease happening in London, the process of that was that they will collect data about the number of patients who went to the hospitals, collected that data, and then saw a trend and all those things. And then in the period of time, they will predict, or they will say that there is a contagious disease syndrome that has happened in London city. But today, Google can do it much faster by just the data. It can do it much faster. It can predict that contagious disease in the London in a much, much shorter time, and actions start based upon that. Technology change. The profession change that has happened. If you take the question of disease, there is one aspect of it. I said that diseases have been already won. So it is not the question of disease, it is now the question of improvement of human beings. To make a human being better than what it can be, whether it is in terms of its abilities, the abilities that make him see or hear or listen or understand or whatever that it is there, to make those capabilities better, already work is on and quite a lot of work is done. And if I see this accelerating pace of change in the next 10 years, you will see human beings which have got much more better capabilities inbuilt into them. I will see robots which are built with the intelligence of the human beings, I will see robots which are built with the emotional touch of a human being, Because always when the question is asked, whatever happens, there will be something for the human being to do, which is the human touch or which is the human angle. That is what the answer that was given. But what if the robots get the human touch themselves and adapt themselves to it? That also comes. And if you see that in the context of a classroom, or a teacher or this thing, what is that you will see in the future? One, if I see the past, it was the classroom which was an information giving space, in which I gave information because information was scarce. Information was not available. If I were to see a classroom in Mexico 100 years back, and at that situation of 100 years back, the teacher was supposed to give information which was scarce to those people in the classroom, which was not having access to that information. And therefore the classroom were information giving. If I were to see that those students at that time who had access to the information, the rich class, if I'm a class at that time, who had that access to the information, to them also the access was very limited, maybe to religious textbooks or to some history textbooks, and not beyond that. And if I see the class of today, or a child going to a class in 2040, if the teacher gives information, not needed. And the information that will be available is so much more that the teacher cannot give that information. That is the second part of it. The teacher cannot give that information because the information is so much more. And the student will have so much more access to that information. So if I go to today a remote village in India, and if I have a smartphone and internet connectivity, I can spend a few lifetimes in just reading the Wikipedia, in just reading the online courses that are available today, on the net, and I can spend a few lifetimes. And if I say that I'll continue doing that 20 years from now, which I can do it today, will information giving be a part of the education or not, is the question that I am raising, Information giving. Or is it what? If it is not information giving, then it is what? If I have to take the context of what we call as the liberal education, that I want to make the students to be able to make sense out of that information, to learn from that information, to be able to distinguish between what is correct and what is not correct, to be able to distinguish between what is important and what is unimportant. That is the education that I need to give. That is the education I need to give to the students. And how do I give that? Maybe I'll put 1 or 2 points after a few minutes, so that how we do that today. Because one is the context of 2050, but I have to see what I have to do today, because then the change that will happen from today to that 2050 will be a very unpredictable change, and we have to be ready to be able to accept that change and mold according to that change. If I were to today give an instruction to the child in the class, or a young born today who is 2 years old and who will be a graduate 20 years from now, will this education be useful to him or not, is a big question that we have to answer. Today, if we were to see, what has happened is that we have built a organic algorithm, which is the human being, and there is a huge pace of technology change in developing an inorganic algorithm, which is the machine, which is the intelligence, artificial intelligence. Without the artificial intelligence, also the algorithm, the unorganic algorithm. And the organic algorithm is the man. You see the stories of Watson of the IBM playing chess with the chess champion, or you see the Chinese game, which is still tougher than the chess game played by the machine and winning. And today, if I had to tell you, there are companies now today who have appointed machines on the board of directors with voting powers. Today it exists, today. I'm not talking about future. Today, in fact, there are machines which are there as the board member of a company, of an investment company, with voting rights. And what does it do? It is churning the data, and then telling the decision about where to invest and where not to invest. And it has the powers of all the powers that a board member has. You can give many such examples of what is already happening today in the banking field, in the field of insurance, or in the field of autonomous cars, or in the field, take the autonomous car in the traffic, the autonomous cars and the traffic. What you see today is the cars, autonomous cars, the driverless cars, already running on the streets on an experimental basis. And you have quite a few announcements of fleet of buses running like this, or a fleet of trucks running like this on an autonomous basis on fixed routes. You have just very recently read in China they have allowed the driverless taxis to be allowed on the roads, driverless taxis, but with the driver sitting on the steering and things like that. That has already been announced. And the 10 years from now, you don't see that very far off. The change in technology that is happening. We will talk about a completely interconnected traffic network of a city. I may say that what use of it is in India is what I will say. What use it that our traffic is so bad that do we think of autonomous cars coming on the Indian traffic roads or not coming, and all those things. I may debate this question. I will debate these questions in a different context. But I think you will find many situations where these autonomous cars will come in India also. Many situations in which the cars will come in India too. But what I was trying to say is that the context of 2040 or 2050, I will see one, different technology, different human being, and different systems. That is for sure. And if I were to see what is a different human being of 2040, so what will be a human being like in 2040 or 2050? What will he be like? Maybe he is with an enhanced brain, and maybe he is with an enhanced learning capability. Maybe he is with an enhanced life, 120, 150 years, 130 years, 140 years. That is the reality that we'll see very soon. Today we have reached 80. For us to reach now 120 will not be very far off for a human being to see. So if I learning today in 2040 becoming a graduate, and that knowledge of graduateness to be useful to him for the next 90 years, not next 30 years, for the next 90 years is what we are trying to talk about. And therefore, the whole context of education changes. The whole context of education changes. Because I want to make them useful, to be able to be useful to the society for the next 90 years. You can talk about jobs. That is a thing that almost everybody talks. The new definition of what job is, or what work is. There are new definitions of what work is and what job is. And the study that was done in the Oxford University about the job situation 10 years from now in US, of how much percentage of jobs in different categories of jobs will go away, and how many in different categories will remain, and how many new types of jobs will come up. Those studies are being done at different places. But the context in which we are talking today clearly says that if I have to survive in that job market, if I have to survive in that type of a work environment and culture, what I need to learn today will be something different, It is today or 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I have to make that gradual change from today to that situation is what I should be doing. I have to be teaching students to be able to learn, emphasis on the lifelong learning, the new learning, the lifelong learning that is there, and how do I put the systems of lifelong learning in my education framework will be very critical in my judgment, very, very critical in my judgment. The lifelong learning situation to make the career of individuals change every 10 years dramatically and still be able to be useful. The way of trying to work like a world citizen will be much, much more, because I'll be one part of the network which is connecting all of us, the flow which is connecting all of us, and my contribution, my job may be of hours or maybe of days on this cultural, on this network, and what I will do in that. And I have to be competent enough to do that and things like that. That is the type of scenarios that will be coming up in the future. I have some more wild scenarios which I don't want to project today of what the education is, but I will end by saying that to get to those wild scenarios, to get to this, I need to do something today. Because otherwise they'll say professor is talking in the air and that is the end of the air. That's all. Nobody bothers about what needs to be done today. So I don't talk about that. So let me talk about what I think the graduate attributes that we should be talking about today, little bit change than the graduate attributes that we have been talking about in different education for all these years. The graduate attributes of communication, the graduate attribute of trying to work in groups. These are the graduate attributes that we write in different reports. That graduate attributes have been listed, and we can talk about it. But to me, some of the graduate attributes that we need to inculcate in our education system today will be the graduate aptitude of what I call as sense making. I think that is the graduate attribute that I need. The sense making would be to be able to make sense out of the information that is available to him. That is the sense making in a context in which that individual is, That means it will mean deeper insights into the subjects and cross-pollination to a great extent, If it will also mean, the second graduate attribute that I want to talk will be the graduate aptitude of social intelligence, And that will become a very critical thing. It will become a very, very critical thing, the social intelligence, that is the ability to be able to connect to others in a very deep and meaningful way, not just the cursory social connects that we talk about, in a very deep and connecting way. I will also talk about the attribute of the individual to have the cultural competence of different cities. I will also talk about the attribute of computational thinking, computational thinking, not just the computational skill set ability, no, the computational thinking of the individuals will need to be nurtured. The new media literacy, and how do I use this new media to be able to learn, the new media literacy. I'll talk about the competency of the transdisciplinarity, the competence of design mindset, the competence, the capability of taking up cognitive load, which is going to become higher and higher, and the capability of being able to have what's called as the virtual collaboration. And if we talk about this type of capability building into our graduate systems, by whatever policy means, by whatever systems that we create, by trying to give them this type of capabilities, probably these are the sets given by the WTO, the World Trade Organizations, by the WTO, and the summits that have debated over these. And I'm only telling the same thing. I'm telling only the same thing that have been given. And that's what we need in the new world, for the students to be able to be capable of doing these types of things in the future. I just want to end up by talking about one more point, last one point. In this world of change of technology and the systems in which we are living, the social media, the globalization, the word fakery, F-A-K-E-R-Y, fakeness, are what I call sophisticatedly as alternate data sets or alternate opinions. From the same data sets that I have one set of opinion, and the same data set can be used to create another opinion, another data set, which may be the alternate data set. And these are things that are coming into the market. You are seeing it. In the political field, you see this, or in the social field, you see this, that alternate viewpoint. Or if I go 29 with artificial intelligence and beyond, what will prevent the intelligence that is inherent in the machine to write papers themselves, to create data themselves, to create the interpretation of data themselves in the future, and write documents and write papers, create fake imagery and write papers? Nothing can prevent it, because the intelligence is better than the human intelligence. And if I get that as a fake, where is the intelligence to detect that as fake? Today, I have plagiarism checks. In a very small way, I have plagiarism checks to check that this article is not a plagiarized article. This is what the small check that I do today for any article, right? But if the whole article is a fake article in the future, a fake research in the future, done by the machine, done by the people, what is it? How do I detect that fakery is the question. How do I detect that fakery? And how am I able to search for the truth? Because science and technology is nothing but search for truth, ultimately. Education is nothing but the search for truth. How do I search the truth from amongst this fakery? It's a very huge subject challenge that we'll face in the next few years, next 10 years. We'll face that challenge. And the first answer to these questions that will come in the minds of our rulers, our administrators, would be to put regulations on this. That is the first answer that will come. Let us frame some regulation as we framed the regulation of plagiarism, that every thesis has to be checked for plagiarism before it is submitted. I will try to put some regulation also in these structures. But to my mind, I don't think regulations will work. We have seen it today. Regulations don't work. Regulations don't work. Globalization context and the data flows all over the world. You cannot regulate. Even though I try to regulate now so many things by international laws, whether it is space or whether it is earth or whether it is contagious diseases, I try to rule the whole world by a common law, which is a very difficult thing to do. And will I do the same thing for this type of fakery, a common law, common regulation for the world, or a regulation for the country that this thing should happen before I can say that this is a fakery or this is a genuine result or a genuine result? What will I do? The answer to me for that comes to mind is, it is more of not a regulatory answer, but it is a cultural answer that we should give. It is a cultural answer. It is the change of attitude. It is the change of trying to teach the students the values of the systems, the values of the individuals. That has to be taught as a cultural answer to that question. And probably to my mind, that will be the biggest challenge to the education system of the future, to teach this culture, to teach this culture. It is so easy to teach the Pythagoras theorem, or so easy to teach the first law and second law of thermodynamics. It is very easy. I go there and write on the board and teach them the thermodynamics law or whatever it is. So easy. Nothing very difficult at all. But if I say that I need to change the change of mindset or the change or the culture that I want to integrate into the individuals, how do I teach? That is the question. How do I teach that to the students? And probably the challenge, the biggest challenge in 2040 will be to teach this ability to change in the student, and the ability to be able to sustain the flow, information flows that are coming on them, to be able to make sense out of this, to be able to live in this very uncertain, accelerating world. So it is like stability of a system. What is stability of a system? I am standing here in front of you, I am stable. But if I am on a accelerating path of change, am I stable? I think that stability will be the stability of a man on a bicycle. And if the bicycle is standing still, he is not stable at all, because he cannot remain stable if the bicycle is standing still. And that person can remain stable only if he starts riding the bicycle and walks along with that bicycle and drives the bicycle. Then he is a stable person. And if I am talking about that type of stability of individual in the future, I am talking about a culture change in that individual to be able to ride through this uncertain world, the uncertain accelerating world in the future. Thank you very much, sir.